I loved him more than the degree. That thought came to me one early autumn morning, when the university campus still lingered with the scent of wet grass and roasted coffee from the small cafe at the library corner. I am Ashton, a third-year communications major, the type who always carries a notebook, scribbling half-finished stories that haven't been named yet. And Colton. He's in engineering, tall, broad-shouldered, always wearing a gray hoodie even on sunny days. We met in a strange elective class called Ethics in Technology and Humanity, where questions had no clear answers, much like the feelings growing inside me. On the first day, I sat in the third row, tapping my pen on the edge of the desk. Colton came in late, apologizing in a deep voice with a seemingly careless smile. When he sat down next to me, the only seat left, the space felt tighter. The clean smell of soap, the warmth from his arm lightly brushing my sleeve. I turned away, pretending to take notes, but my heart couldn't pretend. It beat faster, as if it had just heard its name called. We talked after class. He asked to borrow a pen. I asked if he liked the course. Colton shrugged, saying he signed up just to fill credits. I smiled, an awkward smile from someone always serious about grades. But then he talked about building a robotic arm in the lab, his eyes lighting up when mentioning circuits and errors. I listened, not because I understood, but because I wanted to remember how he told it. Slowly, pausing occasionally as if considering whether to continue. We started studying together. At first, in the library, on long wooden tables under yellow lights and the sound of flipping pages. I taught Colton how to write essays without them being dry. He helped me solve statistics problems that made me want to run away. Evenings stretched on, coffee cooling, and the distance between us shortening. Once, when I leaned down to fix a sentence for him, Colton placed his hand on my wrist to hold the page. Just a second, but I felt myself on the edge of something unnameable. In America, people talk a lot about freedom, about being yourself. But on campus, freedom is sometimes like a loose jacket. It covers a lot, but not everything. I dated before, come out, been stared at. It didn't always hurt, but enough to teach me caution. Colton was different. He never said it outright. Sometimes I thought he was straight. Other times, I thought he was avoiding a question he wasn't ready to answer. One night, we stayed in my dorm to finish a group project. Rain fell outside the window, steady like breathing. Colton lay sprawled on the rug, reading my draft. I sat leaning against the bed, watching him through the rain. "You write well," he said, without looking up. "Like, it makes people want to stay." I swallowed hard. Stay. That word stuck in my throat, waiting for something to be acknowledged. When his phone buzzed, Colton glanced at the screen, frowned, and turned it off. I pretended not to notice. Some things are best left unasked. But that night, as he stood to leave, lingering awkwardly at the door as if forgetting something, I knew I couldn't keep pretending. "Colton," I called. He turned back. We stood facing each other, close enough to hear breaths. "Are you scared?" I asked, unsure what I meant, the exam, the future, or other stares. Colton looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "I'm scared of missing out." And in that moment, I understood. Not everything needs a label right away. Some feelings just need to be acknowledged by staying a little longer. He didn't kiss me that night. Instead, Colton placed his hand on my shoulder, squeezing lightly, like an unspoken promise. When the door closed, I sat on the floor, heart pounding. I thought about the degree, 4 years, tuition, family expectations, societies. Then I thought about Colton, about how he looked at me when he said, "Stay." I knew, even though nothing had happened yet, I'd crossed to another side of my life. I loved him more than the degree, not because I undervalued knowledge, but because for the first time, I saw the future not just as words printed on paper. It had a deep voice, warm hands, rainy nights, and things yet to be named. And I was ready to wait, even though waiting always comes with hurt. After that rainy night, everything changed in a very subtle way, like autumn sliding into winter, and you only notice because the wind is a bit colder. Colton didn't avoid me. On the contrary, he showed up more regularly. At the library at 9 p.m., at the burrito place near the dorm after class, in our usual seats in ethics in technology. But between us was a new silence, thin and clear, fragile if touched too hard. I started noticing small details. How Colton tapped his fingers on his coffee cup when thinking. How he tilted his head when listening to me read a paragraph. How he always slowed down so I could keep up. Those gestures said nothing specific, but they accumulated, like evidence of something growing. I wondered, if love is an equation, where are our variables heading? Academic pressure weighed on me as midterms approached. The professor assigned a big essay, a 20-page ethical analysis. For me, it could save or ruin my scholarship. For Colton, it was a headache. We decided to do it together, splitting parts, meeting every evening. Some days, he slumped over the table, complaining his brain only wanted to speak in circuit diagrams. I laughed, handed him a cookie, saying every story needs rhythm. One Friday evening, when the library closed early for an event, we moved to the common room in Colton's dorm. Posters of old rock bands on the walls, a mix of stale pizza and laundry detergent. We sat on the floor, backs against the sofa, laptops between us. When Colton read aloud a section I'd written, his voice stumbled slightly on the emotional parts. Corrected, he read again, better. We looked at each other and smiled, a rare moment of sync. Then his phone buzzed again. This time, Colton didn't turn it off right away. He stepped out to the small balcony. I didn't hear the words, just saw his shadow blur behind the glass. When he returned, his face was closed off. I didn't ask, but the feeling of being sidelined, like a margin note, made my chest ache. Is something wrong? I asked, unable to hold back. Colton sat down across from me. Family, he said. They want me home this weekend. Talking about the future. That word, future, dropped between us like something heavy. I thought of the degree, the straight path laid out. I thought of how I'd gotten used to standing off to the side. What do you want? I asked, looking straight at him. Colton was silent so long I thought I'd asked too much. Then he said, I want to not choose alone. That answer solved nothing, but it opened a door. I nodded, as if we'd agreed to step into a long hallway together. We finished the essay at 2 a.m. When we closed the laptops, the room was strangely quiet. Colton got up for water, came back, sat very close. The space between our knees vanished. I felt the warmth, the breaths. No one spoke. Sometimes words just ruin things. Colton touched my hand first, lightly as if checking permission. I didn't pull away. He looked at me, eyes questioning. I nodded. The kiss came slow, awkward, but real. No fireworks, just the feeling of being seen, chosen in a brief but full moment. When our lips parted, we didn't smile. We breathed. After that, fear came. Not fear of the kiss, but of what it entailed. I thought of the dorm, the hallways, the questions. Colton rested his forehead against mine, whispering, Don't turn it into a promise we don't understand yet. I understood. We stayed in the silence, learning to exist with what had just happened. In the days after, we didn't change publicly. But there were private signals. A shoulder brush in passing. A longer than usual glance. A midnight text just to ask, you okay? I felt stretched between two things, ambition and desire. The degree lay ahead, bright, applauded by society. Colton stood beside, quiet but real. I started rewriting, not the essay but lines for myself. I wrote about how loving someone isn't abandoning the future, but redefining it. I wrote about how bravery isn't always shouting, sometimes it's just holding the right hand at the right time. And I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time I didn't want to walk it alone. Everything started cracking the week before finals, when pressure was no longer abstract but a dull ache behind my neck. My professor called me in for a talk, voice stern but kind. My scholarship was being considered for a summer exchange program, a golden opportunity, one where my record needed to be clean, focused, undistracted. I nodded, took notes, said the right things. When I left the room, I saw Colton at the end of the hallway, leaning against a locker, waiting. How'd it go? He asked. Good, I said. And then, not knowing what else, I added, busy. Colton nodded, as if he'd expected it. We walked out together. It was cold, Wind whipping through the central quad. Students hurried by, everyone with somewhere to be. I suddenly realized I was walking faster, as if afraid of being caught up. In the following days, we met less. Not out of anger, but schedules and fatigue. Text shortened. Where are you? Became you okay? I knew I was withdrawing, not from Colton, but from the feelings. I feared that if I let myself stay in that warm space, I'd lose what I'd built over years. One evening, Colton came to my dorm unannounced. I was mid-essay, eyes tired, head tense. When I opened the door and saw him, I was both relieved and panicked. We need to talk, he said, not accusing, the voice of someone afraid of being left behind. We sat facing each other on the bed. No rain, no background music. Just truth. Colton talked about feeling like he was outside my life, that he didn't need public acknowledgement, didn't need a label yet, just to know he wasn't a blank spot between priorities. I listened, each word like a needle, painful because true. I don't know how to do well and not lose you, I said finally. My voice cracked on lose. Colton looked at me, eyes sad but steady. I don't want to be what you sacrifice, he said. But I also don't want to be what you hide. That sentence lingered long after he left. I sat alone, staring at the degree hanging in the future. A beautiful symbol, but silent. I thought of those who'd told me love is a luxury when building a career. I thought of how Colton held my hand, as if staying didn't need proof. Finals day came. I did well, too well. When I submitted, I felt empty. I texted Colton, "You free?" He replied immediately, "Always." We met at the old stadium behind the dorms, where few people went. Gray sky, cold wind, but no rain. I spilled everything about the scholarship, the fear, how I tried to control something that shouldn't be controlled. Colton listened, no interruptions. When I finished, he stepped closer. "I don't need you to choose me over the future," he said. "I need you to give me a place in that future." We kissed again, this time not awkward. There was a new certainty, not because everything was clear, but because we'd said what needed saying. I realized love doesn't require you to tear down what you've built. It requires you to open the door. The scholarship news came a week later. I was selected. I read the email 3 times. Then I called Colton. He laughed loud over the phone, congratulating me like it was our shared win. And in that moment, I knew I hadn't loved the wrong person. We didn't promise things too far off. Just to be honest. Just to stay within our abilities. I started believing the degree wasn't the only destination. That there are successes not stamped, but lived. Spring came slowly, as if the campus needed time to believe winter had truly let go. The trees in front of the library began to speckle with young green, and students sat on the grass, books open but eyes on the sky. Colton and I stepped into a new rhythm. Not flashy, not hiding. We learned to schedule each other, like scheduling for the future. Specific, honest, with room for mistakes. My summer exchange program was on the East Coast. A noisy, fast city full of opportunities. I prepared files, got signatures, attended orientation. Colton helped me pick a jacket, saying the sea wind was different from here. I smiled, noting how he cared in very everyday ways. In return, I went to his lab more, learning to read the diagrams he loved, even if I didn't understand them all. I understood Colton by watching him work. Focused, patient, unshowy. There were nights we lay side by side, talking about seemingly unrelated things. Childhood foods, old songs, the first time realizing we were different. Colton said he'd once thought feelings slowed you down. I said I'd thought love was something to pack away after finishing tasks. We laughed at realizing we'd lived by and signed formulas. Then a small thing happened, small, but sharp enough. At a department party, a classmate casually asked Colton about his girlfriend. Colton faltered, smiled awkwardly, changed the subject. I stood there, holding a cup of water, feeling like an outsider. Not because he didn't say it, but because I realized I'd never asked. When are we ready to be named? That night, I told Colton how I felt. No blame, just truth. He was silent for a bit, then apologized, not for not coming out, but for leaving me alone in that moment. "I'm learning," he said. Not to become someone else, but to dare stand straight. I believed him, not because of words, but because of how he held my hand after, tighter. The day I left for the exchange, Colton saw me off at the station. No dramatic tears. Just a long hug enough to carry. Write to me, he said. I promised. And I kept it. Writing about the new city, crowded classes, the feeling of freedom mixed with loneliness. Colton replied with lab photos, short but steady lines. We learned to love through distance, not filling it with doubt, but with presence. In that city, I met people who believed success was speed. I got swept up, sometimes forgetting to reply. Sometimes Colton was silent longer than usual. We weren't perfect, but when I called, he answered. When he needed, I was there, even if just on screen. I understood that growing up doesn't shrink love. It makes it more precise. At summer's end, I returned. The campus welcomed me with the smell of dry leaves and slanting sun. Colton waited in front of the library, the familiar gray hoodie. We said nothing for the first few seconds. Then he kissed me in broad daylight amid the crowd. Not long, not showy. Just enough to say, we're here. The new semester began, bringing choices. I got an offer for a full-time internship in the exchange city. A big step. Colton had a chance for an extended research project. We sat together, pros and cons, no avoidance. No one asked the other to give up. We agreed temporary distance with plans, with return dates. I felt less scared than before. Because this time, the future didn't oppose love. It stood beside. I realized loving Colton didn't devalue my degree. On the contrary, it taught me why I wanted to learn, to go, to return. Love isn't the final reward. It's the grammar that helps me sentence my life. Senior year came faster than I imagined. Calendar pages torn off steadily. Mornings starting with strong coffee and ending with to-do lists. Colton and I entered a phase where everything had final projects, final exams, final meetings before each temporarily branched off. I realized I'd stopped counting days by credits, but by moments with him. Colton's research project grew tense. Some nights he stayed in the lab until 2 a.m., eyes red, voice tired. I brought food, sat beside, asked little. He said he feared failure, not grades, but feeling not enough. I understood. I'd once thought my worth was only when meeting standards. We learned to dismantle fear by naming it, then setting it between us where it lost power. Graduation was set for a sunny day. Black gowns, square hats, smiles captured to prove a journey. My family came, proud, emotional. Colton stood at the back of the crowd, eyes searching for me. When I stepped up to receive my degree, applause rose like waves. I held the degree heavy and thin. In that moment, I thought of all the times I'd nearly lost him to fear. And I knew, if I had to choose, I'd choose a life without regret. After the ceremony, we escaped the crowd, sitting on the familiar steps in front of the library. Colton pulled an envelope from his backpack. Not a ring, not a big promise. Inside was a train ticket, departure date matching my new job start in another city. I requested a project transfer, he said, a bit shy. Not because of you, but because I want to be where I choose. I laughed, eyes stinging. We didn't make each other reasons, we became choices. That night, we lay side by side, window open, wind carrying summer scents. I told Colton I was still scared, of failure, change, loving too much. He kissed my forehead, saying fear isn't weakness, but a sign you're entering something meaningful. I memorized that like a key formula. The day we left campus, I looked back one last time. The paths, classrooms, dark corners that witnessed me becoming myself. The degree in hand, symbol of effort. Colton beside, symbol of choice. I understood life doesn't require choosing between success and love. It requires daring to define success in a way you can live with. I loved him more than the degree, not because I undervalued knowledge, but because love taught me how to use knowledge to live kindly with myself. If one day everything changes, I still know I chose right in this moment. To stay, to speak truth, to love when loving is hardest. And as the train rolled, the city opening ahead, I held Colton's hand. No vows needed, just walking together, in the rhythm of two who've learned not to drop what's most important.